Dear friends, in recent years, cultural diplomacy has become increasingly more accepted as a very important part of international relations. Politicians, media, and the academia spend more and more time, energy, and resources on soft power and cultural diplomacy, not least the branding of nations, of regions, of cities, and by means of cultural diplomacy. I am very happy to be part of the new ambitious plans of Vytautas Magnus University in the field of cultural diplomacy. However, it's ironic that at the same time as we experience an international boom of soft power, the Russian president decided to use hard power in an absurd ambition to recreate an empire of the past. The Russian invasion on 24 February 2022 has completely changed the geopolitical situation in the world. We do not know what the world will look like in 5 or 10 years, but it seems clear that the international game rules have been changed for the foreseeable future. This is also a challenge for cultural diplomacy. Russia has decided to distance itself from Europe and European democracy. Russia has chosen isolation instead of cooperation. The international community has reacted strongly against the aggressors. The UN General Assembly has twice voted very strongly in condemning Russia. 141 governments supported the strong resolutions. Only 4 countries, Belarus, North Korea, Syria, and Eritrea, supported Russia. Some 40 governments, including China and India, abstained or were absent in the General Assembly votes. But the other day, the G20 meeting even strengthened the group of critical voices. Preparations are underway to charge the Russian president with crimes against international law and against humanity. All members of the European Union, plus United Kingdom, USA, Canada, Japan, and Australia, and many others, have introduced strong sanctions against Russia. Sanctions which are not only financial, economic, or political. Russian sports have been isolated from Olympic competitions, from Football World Cup, from Champions League, from ice hockey, etc. Russian arts exhibitions, guest performances by orchestras and other music groups have been cancelled. Only the formal diplomatic relations remain. All other relations, including culture diplomacy, have come to a standstill. In theory, some form of culture diplomacy should be possible even between enemies, even during a war. After all, culture diplomacy should promote peace. But the Russian president has crossed too many red lines. If any intruder enters a house, destroys the kitchen, and kills the children of the family, you cannot demand that the parents invite him for dinner or for making music together. So the Russian invasion may have illustrated the limits for culture diplomacy at the official level. At the same time, thousands of oppositional Russian artists and intellectuals, including members of our European Culture Parliament, have moved abroad to democratic countries and may offer another form of culture diplomacy at unofficial level. Promoting human rights, including support to persecuted oppositional groups, is an important objective for cultural diplomacy. The good news in today's terrible situation is that the war seems to have united democracies of Europe to an extent which we dared not hope for only a year ago. All EU sanctions have been decided upon unanimously by 27 countries. The solidarity with Ukraine is demonstrated day by day through military support, economic support, reception of millions of refugees, and through many solidarity concerts, exhibitions, and other culture diplomacy events. The EU and its allies stand ready to strongly support Ukrainian post-war reconstruction. The Eastern Partnership Programme of the European Union is developing. This programme has a great potential, also in the field of culture. The EU membership process for Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and West Balkan has been vitalized. Cultural diplomacy at all levels plays an important role in this process. European cooperation and integration had suffered from deep divisions for more than 10 years on economic issues between North and South, on social and immigration issues between East and West. Last year, many observers talked about a crisis for the European Union. But the unity demonstrated this year gives us hope that our common European values of democracy and human rights may have a renaissance. These values, promoted by active cultural diplomacy, should be the basis for a future enlargement of the European Union. Intensified exchange in the arts, in university cooperation, in sports, in gastronomy, in cultural tourism, and many other fields of cultural diplomacy will facilitate this process. In this way, previously closed doors can be opened. You may have heard about a statement by one of the fathers of the European Union, the French politician Jean Monnet, some 25 years after the first steps were taken in direction European integration. He was quoted to have said, "If I were to start the European project again from the beginning, I would have started with culture." Well, that sounds wonderful from a human cultural diplomacy point of view, doesn't it? The problem, however, is that Jean Monnet never said that. He could never have said it. The wounds from the Second World War were far too deep and sensitive. The mutual mistrust and suspicion among populations was too strong. Unfortunately, the only way to re-establish some sort of mutual confidence between peoples who had been killing each other or hating each other for more than 30 years was the creating of common platforms in the heavy industry, which constitutes the basis for potential military production. It had to start with hard power, through the Coal and Steel Union 1952, and through NATO cooperation between the traditional rivals France and Germany. This created a system of mutual control over the very basis for warfare. Only so, and through common economic interest, could, slowly but surely, a European spirit of respect, understanding, cooperation, and even friendship be created. But as we all know, this spirit of cooperation for a long time was enjoyed only by the West Europeans. The next step remained to tear down the Iron Curtain and the Berlin Wall, which happened in 1989 till 1991. The inclusion of Eastern and Central European states in the European Union in 2004 and 2007 confirmed this wonderful development. And we now have good prospects for a further enlargement of the European project. New potential members, including Ukraine, are knocking at the doors of the European Union. And I'm confident that these doors will be opened. Hard power, not least economic support, will of course be important in this process, but cultural diplomacy and soft power will play an enormous role in bringing people together at all levels of society. Ladies and gentlemen, healing the wounds in relation to Russia will be difficult. Once this war is over, not only Ukraine, but the whole European Union and other Western allies on one side and the Russian Federation on the other side are likely to face a situation similar to the post-World War years. It will be necessary to consider how to heal these war wounds. Strong mutual guarantees, including safe and respected borders controlled by the United Nations or other international bodies, will probably have to be established. When such guarantees are at place, cultural diplomacy could start playing a real role. The emotional resistance against approaching the other side will be strong. The wounds will not heal overnight or automatically. But this time we will have some strong arguments for restoring relations, at least in one aspect. The need for common action to save the planet from a climate disaster is too evident to be neglected. The climate crisis is a global crisis. Governments, institutions, civil society, and the peoples of both sides of this conflict have to accept the necessity of cooperating in order to save the planet. Russia will have to participate and contribute. Cultural diplomacy will play an important role in promoting such common action. On the European side, including Ukraine, the hope remains that Russia could once take a democratic path and abandon authoritarianism. Such a development would in itself be a guarantee against new aggressions. After all, history tells us that democratic states seldom starts war or invades neighbors. Such a development would, of course, also facilitate a faster process of healing wounds and reconstructing normal relations. If, however, Moscow remains authoritarian and anti-democratic, cooperation might limit itself to the necessary climate cooperation mentioned previously. And for the rest of relations, a Cold War atmosphere might prevail. In this case, Europe and the USA may have to take recourse to cultural diplomacy, a cultural diplomacy model from the Cold War times, a program for so-called peaceful cooperation. This program was launched in the late 1950s and brought hundreds of thousands of artists, students, scientists, and athletes across the Cold War Iron Curtain in both directions. The Peaceful Cooperation Program was a typical top-down initiative and really not in line with today's bottom-up ambition in cultural diplomacy through civil society, tourism, social media, etc. But history showed that the peaceful cooperation contributed to the democratic West becoming the winner of the Cold War at the end. How could this happen? Well, on one side, the personal contacts gave oppositional Russians the chance to defect from their group and ask for asylum in the West. On the other side, and even more importantly, KGB offers later admitted that the arrival of Western jazz orchestras and student groups had the effect of Trojan horses for Russians. Their eyes were opened for the attraction in the lifestyle of people coming from a free, democratic world. I am convinced that the democratic world would be the winner once more if future forces governments to introduce a 21st century version of official peaceful cooperation with a continued authoritarian regime in Russia. The democratic side will win. Ladies and gentlemen, after more than 2 years of corona pandemic, we were hoping for better times with open borders, global cooperation, and flourishing cultural diplomacy. But the Russian invasion instead created an annus horribilis, and we are faced with many new challenges at all levels of society. But our common European commitment to fight for democracy and human rights is encouraging. One day the war will be over, and we hope with Ukraine as the winner, both until the end of the war and in the new post-war Europe. Cultural diplomacy will play an increasing role at all levels. Thank you, and Slava Ukraina.